Judge!
What is it?
My opponent says that, I didn't negate his card, I merely just destroyed it with MST.
Is it a continuous spell?
Yes, he doesn't get his effect, correct?
Correct. He doesn't get his effect, but you also did not negate the card. Hey guys, it's Tombox here coming at you with a video about rules. Now, we all know that the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh! Can get super complicated super quickly because Konami's been adding more and more conditions to effects, which kind of make things a little bit more difficult for us to directly translate back onto the playing field. And even judges are at fault here, we make mistakes as well. And because of this, some players actually take advantage of the complicated rules of Yu-Gi-Oh! And kind of bully little kids into, well, the wrong ruling, and therefore teaching them bad rules just to take a win off of them because they're getting really embarrassed that they're losing to some I guess scrub or some noob. But that's actually very harmful, and it sets up players to be a bad player in the upcoming future, and we don't want that. We all have been screwed over by the rules, whether it be from a judge rule or an event ruling. But this video will be covering 5 basic rules that we all should know about Yu-Gi-Oh! Just so that we don't get screwed over by the rules. And sometimes you can just look at a card text without even calling a judge and you can rule it out. But of course, if you have any questions, always call a judge. So the very first ruling I want to talk about is control. Seems simple enough, right? Everyone should know how control works. It's like a very fundamental rule in Yu-Gi-Oh! It's basically everything on your side of the field. This is different from ownership. Ownership is the literal meaning of the guy that owns the card. Now, control. If it's everything on your side of the field, mainly being the monster, spells and traps, pendulum zones, and field zone, well, what is there more to learn? Well, it starts to get a bit more complicated when you add in negation into the window. You put negation into the window, and you also put summoning windows in there, and then it's like, oh, maybe it gets a little bit more messy, especially with spells and traps as well. Now, for this example, I'm going to be using Sangan. Say I set a Sangan onto the field, and then my opponent sets a Solemn Warning, and then on my turn, I flip summon the Sangan, only for my opponent to chain Solemn Warning to negate the summon and destroy it. Does my Sangan get a search? It was technically on the field for an entire turn. Well, no, I don't get that search because the summoning was negated, therefore it was not on the field successfully at the time. It was destroyed and sent to the graveyard. Does that make sense? Okay. To explain this, what it means is when you perform a summon, when a monster is mid-summon, when it is in its summoning window, this is not when it's summoned successfully, but in the summoning window before it lands on the field, it is technically not on the field. It is in the summoning window phase. This is, I don't know exactly have a best answer for this, but consider it in limbo, in summon limbo per se. And then it was negated in the summon limbo and then destroyed. When you perform a flip summon, you put that monster back in that limbo. So in that case, it does make sense that my Sangan doesn't get a search. And to give you another example would be if I'm playing Stellar Knights and then my opponent is also playing Warning again, my turn I preset a Stellar Nova Alpha, my opponent sets a Solemn Warning, and then on my turn I normal summon a Indepth. He chains Warning, and then I can't activate my Stellar Nova Alpha. Like, Stellar Nova Alpha requires me to send one face-up Stellar Knight monster I control to the graveyard to negate and destroy the activation of a spell or trap or monster effect, and then draw one card. Clearly, my monster is in Summon Limbo at the time, therefore not on the field, and therefore I cannot, well, negate the Solemn Warning, and my Indepth will die, and I will not be able to get my search either. So, hopefully that clears it up. But it gets a little bit more complicated when we go into spells. Spells and traps work a little bit differently. Now, for spells and traps, one of the major differences is that spells and traps always start chains. In other words, they are successfully on the field the moment you place it on and activate it. However, just like monsters, if they do get their activation negated, they get to placed in some sort of limbo. Basically, it got rejected off of the field because the activation was negated and then placed into the graveyard. And that holds true too. And to put that into an example, let's go with some more meta-relevant cards currently, which would be the True Draco spells and traps. These spells and traps contain graveyard triggers if they're sent from the field to the graveyard. They will either pop a spell or trap or destroy a monster on the field. Now, say my opponent controls a Lagia. If they're playing True King Dinos, okay, they have a Lagia on the field, seems pretty standard, and I activate True Draco's Heritage. Say they have one spell or trap in their back row. And the moment I activate True Draco's Heritage, they activate their Lagia to negate the activation of my spell card and destroy it. Will I be able to pop? Well, technically I was on the field to begin with, right? Because I'm a spell and trap, you know, I start chain links, and that's the only way that chain links would work. Well, the moment that my activation gets negated, it got rejected off the field. You can consider activation negation as rejection off of the field and then destroyed, sent to the graveyard. It was technically in your hand, it bounced back and sent to the graveyard. It was destroyed before it successfully landed onto the field. Similar concept to getting a monster summon negated. However, one of the biggest differences is that you can actually send the card that is currently being negated as cost, because by being a part of the chain link, it is already part of the field. So to change it up, this is actually going to sound a little bit confusing, but I'm going to add one more card into this change, which would be the emergency provision. So this spell card is a quick play spell that can send spells and traps on my side of the field to the graveyard as cost, so that I can gain 1000 life per copy. So I activate True Draco's Heritage, and then my opponent uses Logia to negate the activation of my True Draco's Heritage and destroy it. But then on top of that, I go to Chainlink 3, I activate Emergency Provisions, sending the copy that is currently trying to be negated, trying to get the activation negated, but the activation is still successful at the moment until it gets negated. So I send it to the graveyard. So reversing the chain link, I gain 1000 life points and send the True Draco's Heritage from the field to the graveyard, okay? Because I have to send one spell card I control. So if it's on the field, you technically control it for spells and traps, because I'm not in some sort of summoning negation window. And then chain link 2, the Logia will attempt to negate the thing that's no longer even there. So it was still successfully negated, I suppose, but it won't be able to destroy it either. And then Chainlink 1 obviously will not successfully resolve because it's a continuous spell card and it will be sent to the graveyard. Now, does my Heritage activate? Yes, it does, because it was on the field when it was sent to the graveyard. I technically controlled it just by the terminology of emergency provisions, by its card text. It had to be on the field for me to send it. So does that confuse you even more? Hopefully not. Now, Madolche monsters seem to have like an exception, right? Well, I'm gonna debunk this right now. They don't have an exception. Like, the very first gen of Madolche monsters state that when this card you control is destroyed by your opponent's card by battle card effect and sent to the graveyard, shuffle this card back into the deck. Okay, well, newer generations of Madolche monsters don't have that word of control anymore, because that's an old terminology of control before they actually came up with possession. And possession envelops all cases, which means the number 2 rule I'll be talking about. But here's the thing. If you actually activate Warning on a Madolche Magiline, it will shuffle back into the deck from the graveyard. But did you control it? I thought it was in limbo. See, that's the confusing part, where it's using an old terminology of control. Technically, that Magiline states possession, not control. That is to keep the rules consistent throughout the entire game. So if you actually try to use enemy controller on a monster that's currently being negated by Logia, you can only put the Logia in defense mode. You cannot tribute that monster that's mid-summon, because that is still in summoning limbo. So all in all, just to wrap it up, if a monster summon is negated, is not in the field. If a spell or trap card activation is negated, it is technically not in the field when the negation is successful. Summoning monsters, they're not technically on the field until their summon is successful. Spells and traps are the opposite. They're technically on the field until they are rejected off of the field. And there's no real exceptions. So the next thing to expand on further from control would be possession. Now, possession is basically everything on your side of the table. Simply put, that's exactly what it is. And there are certain card effects that only activate if it is only in your possession. Say, Madolche cards. In your possession means if that you give it to your opponent and then you destroy, say, a Madolche Hootcake. Hootcake actually won't get shuffled back into the deck because you did not possess it when it was destroyed. And there are also other card effects that contain possession, the card text, such as Artifact Ignition. When your opponent destroys this card while you possess it in your possession, well, your opponent skips their next battle phase. So, possession just expands further, and what includes possession? Exceeds material, banish cards, your deck, your hand, your extra deck, your graveyard, everything there would be stuff in your possession. So the third ruling that you guys should be aware of would be the card activations of spells and traps versus the effect activations of spells and traps. What are the difference? Well, one is the initial activation of the card of putting it on the field, so flipping it face up or activating from hand, and the other one is the card is already face up and you're using an effect that exists on the card text. So So that's the difference. But how does that make a difference? Like, sometimes their effects are the same. Well, the main difference is the cards that interact with it, especially negation cards. There are cards that can only negate the card activation, but not the card effect. What are some examples of this? Totally Awesome can negate a spell or trap card or monster effect, but the spell and trap card is very specifically stated. Therefore, cards that are activating in the graveyard due to a grave trigger, that would be a spell or trap effect. Or the cards that are already face up, like an already face up Zodiac Barrage, that would be using a spell effect and therefore cannot be negated by Totally Awesome. And cards that are counter traps that also match this description would be like Dark Bribe. Dark Bribe can negate the activation of a card, but cannot negate the effect of a card. Okay, well, it sounds complicated. It can be complicated, but it doesn't need to be. But what are some cards that can actually negate both the spell effect and the trap effect? Well, look no further than the Infernal Onunku. Onunku definitely can do it because it states on the card text that you can tribute one monster on your side of the field, and you can negate a spell or trap card or effects. This includes the effects, so that if it's already face up, you can negate it, such as Moon Mirror Shield. You can negate Moon Mirror Shield, and Apex Avian can also do the same thing, and Cyber Dragon Infinity also has the same clause. So these are the cards that can actually go way further in terms of their negation, just because they're not limited by the activation of a spell or trap card. Okay, for the fourth ruling that I'm going to quickly go over would be the cost of sending stuff to the graveyard. There are 4 methods of sending stuff to the graveyard, including, well, technically 5. First of all, just sending it to the graveyard to pay the cost. If the card states it has the action to send a card to the graveyard, there you go, that's the first way. Second way would be discarding a card, another way would be destroying a card, another would be detaching a card, and tributing a card would also, by default, send stuff to the graveyard. If they have, you know, the send to the graveyard condition of activating the effect, these can trigger it. However, it doesn't work the other way around. So if you have to use a tribute trigger and you just send a card to the graveyard, well, the tribute trigger won't activate. And now for the cost, if the cost specifically states send 1 card to the graveyard, 1 monster to the graveyard, so 1 for 1 states that you have to send a monster from your hand to the graveyard. If Macrocosmos is on the field, you can't pay or meet that condition, and therefore you cannot even activate the card. That's something that we should be very clear of. However, just because if a card has a cost to tribute something, or to detach something, or to destroy something, if it doesn't specifically state has to hit the graveyard, those effects will still activate. So just so that we're clear on this stuff. And the 5th ruling that you all should be aware of is how the battle phase works. So the battle phase comes in multiple steps. I'm going to break down each one. The first step is the start step. The moment you enter, you both have a timing window to activate your spells, traps, monster effects, you name it. That's an open window for you to modify the field. The second step would be the battle step. The moment an attack is declared, you enter the attack declaration battle step. That is still part of battle step, and there's 2 windows here, the attack declaration and the regular battle step window. And once one window closes, it immediately moves on to the next one. So after the second window closes, you move on to damage step. So what can you activate in the attack declaration? You can call for Mirror Force because you meet the condition of the attack declaration. You can activate Magical Cylinder. Basically, everything is still an open game at this point, like monster effects as well, quick effects. Those are still live. But then once you moved on to the second battle step, you can't activate stuff that require an attack declaration anymore, because that's not the last thing that happened. And you can activate stuff like Book of Moon, Enemy Controller, Compulsory Evacuation Device. Those are all still live, all available. But once you pass this window as well, you go on to damage step. And effects that don't modify the attack and defense, negate cards that are on the field, or negate effects. Yeah, basically none of those things can activate anymore, so yeah, you're kind of out of luck. And one thing that I've been noticing people kind of cheating with Zodiacs is that they attack with a blank Drident and hoping for response. When they attack into your opponent's Drident that does have something attached, they're waiting for like a detachment. Your opponent passes priority, and the moment you say I attack and then you ask for response, as a judge, you have already passed priority. Therefore, if your opponent says nothing and they say no response, you moved out of the attack declaration window. And now you move on to the battle window. And if you activate Whiptail to attach to your monster, that's fine and all, but you're not going to have a window to actually detach that whip tail to pop a card. Just so you know, this is exactly what I've seen so far. And then people are like, okay, now activate the effect to detach and pop your card. And they're like, well, no, I'm going to detach and pop your card. Well, that window doesn't exist. That's an imaginary window. Now, when you go into the damage step, multiple steps on damage step as well, I believe 4 steps, you have the excuse me, start step, which is all the continuous effects, all the trigger effects will go off now. And then after that, if you attack the face down monsters, they don't flip yet, and then you go into before damage calculation. Up until this point, you can still activate stuff that modify attack and defense. So say your Honest, your Chalice, your Lance, all that stuff still can be activated before damage calculation. But once you pass this point, when you go into performing damage calculation, the only things that would activate at this point would be trigger effects that need to be met during this damage step phase, and stuff that have negation. If you have negation cards, you can still activate them here, but you cannot activate damage modifiers anymore. And after this is done, you go into a phase called after damage calculation, where monsters that are destroyed technically can still activate their effects. They're still on the field technically, they're not sent to the graveyard yet. During the end step, they'll be sent to the graveyard, but here's one thing that does relate, which is if you attack with a Drident onto a Totally Awesome and you have 2 whip tails attached, okay? And then you attack them because you're stronger than the Totally Awesome dies and is destroyed by battle, and then the 2 whip tail activate because they're mandatory, in the damage calculation. There is one window for that toad to actually send itself to the graveyard, therefore destroying your monster and then taking control over it, even though it was already destroyed. It's a stupid ruling. Like, why can destroyed monsters still activate their stuff? Well, it's mainly because of damage step, because the monster technically isn't sent to the graveyard just yet, and yeah, their quick effect is still technically live at that point. Isn't that kind of silly? Continuous effects are turned off, but apparently these quick effects are not. Yeah, that's... to me, it's very silly. But anyways, that's how it works. And then end step, that's when things get moved away, and then you'll go back into the battle step. And that's how battle phase works. So these windows are very, very important. They need to be clear, and make sure that you don't pass priority accidentally and screw yourself over on effects, or maybe create imaginary windows where basically you get your thing. And only when both players pass priority during the battle step, that's when you proceed to the next phase. And yeah, that's actually how phase changing works, actually, is when both players have nothing to activate, then you actually proceed to the next phase. And those are the 5 rules that I believe every player should know. I know I went into like the deep rabbit hole, but this is how some of the cards are ruled, and you have to pay attention to the deeper end of the rulings to actually get some of the more complicated card rulings. And that is all I got for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, please hit me up with a thumbs up. If you guys are confused, leave it down in the comment section below. If I'm wrong on anything, which I shouldn't, I've been looking at a lot of references on these things, hit me up down in the comment section below as well. And now I'm going to proceed to the end phase. And it is so hot in here. Oh my god. There's like 2 lamps, and then it's like 30 degrees in here. By 30 degrees, I mean 30 degrees Celsius. It's so hot. Anyways, hey guys, thanks for watching. If you like this video, please drop us a like so we know we are doing a good job, and you can also subscribe to MST.TV for more fantastic videos by clicking on the button on the left. Don't forget to check out our partners at Imperium Duelist. They make really high quality mats, including some of my own limited edition release stuff. And if you want to check out one of our past videos, click here on the right. As always, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV, and I'll see you next time.